Welcome to the Fatality Free Future podcast. I'm John Barclay.
My name is Holly Ferguson. This is the podcast where we explore the challenges and possibilities of creating a fatality-free future. And we have brought back principal consultant and season 1 favourite guest, Alan Stevenson, back into the studio today.
Thank you. Good to be back.
We've brought you in because we want to dive into the conversation today about complexity in SIF. And where I want to start off this conversation is actually addressing what is the distinction between complexity versus complicated.
So I know you experienced it recently, John. I heard something on the news. I can't even remember what it was. And someone used the word complicated, but they meant complex. And I think it's one of those words that people use interchangeably. So for me, a fundamental distinction. So I think distinction is important when we're using language. Complicated is predictable. There's a predictable outcome for something that's complicated. It might just be tricky to work through. So there's a known solution so people can do it. Complex is unpredictable. So people are using complicated and complex interchangeably. They're talking about a complicated situation, but what they actually mean is it's a complex situation. So they're trying to apply known predictable solutions to something that's complex, which in and of itself is unpredictable. And I think any situation that involves people, human beings, there's a level of complexity that we have to acknowledge and understand, rather than just trying to apply a solution that we think is going to solve the problem, whatever it is. In this conversation, we're talking about serious injuries and fatalities. And then people get annoyed, upset, disappointed when the technical solution that they've tried to apply doesn't work. And there's human beings behind all of that stuff.
We always talk about this internally, right? There's so many different conversations happening about things, and distinction's important. I know we use one around agreement versus alignment. I think this complicated versus complex is important as well. And as you say, because it frames you up to better understand how should I actually think about this and approach this.
And John, when you were thinking about what you wanted to cover in season 2, this was an important topic to you. Why was that?
The experience we're having as a team when we're working with organisations is they're approaching safety in general. I'll talk about safety in general. They're approaching safety in general in a very technical manner because they think it's complex, but they're approaching it from a complicated point of view. You know, they're trying to do it very technically. They haven't quite understood the complexity of it. So when you think about SIF, serious injuries and fatalities, there are a lot of different elements that relate to precursors and amplifiers, the way controls are used, the way controls are interpreted, the way we verify and understand these controls. That's all complex because we're dealing with many different people with many different perceptions and many different backgrounds, and trying to approach it thinking it's complicated is probably why a lot of people are getting frustrated here.
A little story. I've got lots of stories.
That's what we love.
I was we've been doing some work for a particular client. It's an open pit situation, a large operation, a complicated operation, right? There's lots of moving parts, lots of plant moving around, lots of people involved. And we've established a relationship with them, speaking to managers, various levels of the organisation. So we checked in with them only last week, and we said, how's it going? How's it going? We heard, you're trying some new things, different things. Oh, yeah, it's going really well. Yeah, we've noticed some improvements. And I said, so why is that? Why do you think things are improving? What's improving? Ultimately, it's, less incidents, less injuries, all that kind of stuff, right? So this particular person looked at me quizzically and he said, it's lots of things, lots of different things. I said, what things? What things? And he couldn't really answer. So again, I could tell he was thinking about it from a complicated point of view. And then we get into the situation of, well, how could you find out? What could you do to find out why things, why your perception is, why you believe, just looking at numbers, right? Why you believe things are getting better. And again, he quizzically looked at me and I said, why don't you think about just going and asking people in the front line, first of all, have they noticed any improvement, right? You're looking at the improvement just from your statistics over a very short period of time. But what if the people in the front line haven't noticed anything different? What if? What if they have? So what is it they've noticed? Because you could go and ask people in the front line, well, what's different? What are we doing differently? What's better? What's working well? And they go, nothing, just the same. That means that your results are not really telling you anything. You're only going to find out, and that's the complexity. For me, that's the complexity part of it, is being interested, being curious, and going out and talking to people doing the job, the people that have the potential to be seriously injured or killed. What's different? What are we doing better now that we weren't doing before? And he said, it's engagement. I said, so what about engagement? What about it? Why? What makes you say engagement is better? Oh, we're having less incidents. Really?
That's just from engagement.
Yeah. So I think there's lots of things. So they like to simplify it, and I get it. I get it. They want to be able to simplify things and say, we're getting better. But you need to go out there and discover what it is that's better and what's actually contributing to your performance improving, whatever that means. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it spurs the conversation around people want to try and bring something down to simplicity because they can make sense of it and attribute it to something so they can hold confidence. Just coming from a recent conversation, they have this sort of security blanket that if I do these things, I'll get these results. And if something's simple or complicated, then there may be some truth in that I can pull these levers and certain things will happen. Once you move out into complexity, it's not always that black and white. Those same levers may get you some different results depending on things that are happening. And so I like the Stacey Matrix by Ralph Stacey, who talks about agreement and certainty. So agreement on the problem, agreement on the solution. So we know what the problem is, we know what the solution is. And if we've got lots of agreement and lots of agreement to the problem and the solution, then we're moving down into something being simple. Also certainty of the problem and certainty of the solution. If we've got lots of agreement and lots of certainty, then we can pretty much see that as a simple thing. So for example, I've got a flat tyre. Well, why? Because it's got a nail in it. Well, we can look at that as there's a fairly simple problem. We're fairly certain on what caused the problem, and we can go through a solution to that. But the less agreement we have and the less certainty we have, we then start to move into that complicated. But there's still a good level of agreement and certainty because there's technical information in there. But it requires, generally once we move into complicated, it requires subject matter expertise. Like you may need multiple subject matter expertise. But once you move out into complexity, there's a lot of now, and that's where the people factor comes in, more often than not, is the reason why we end up out there. So therefore we have minimal understanding or agreement to the problem. Some people will think it's one thing, other people will think it's something else. And we don't have a lot of agreement on the certainty of it either, right? Because it's not always someone wasn't concentrating or someone wasn't thinking. Human factors are very, very complex in nature. And I think that's why I like this, because it helps leaders understand, well, when are things moving out of being simple to being complicated? And why is that? And where do we need to bring expertise in to help? And we can still use quite a good level of technical orientated solutions to that. But once we move out to complexity, you need to move into adaptive.
Yeah. And I think for many organisations, it's a blend, right? There is a complicated aspect to the challenge that they're facing. But I think what many organisations don't do is look at the complex or the adaptive, Heifetz and Linsky's adaptive leadership stuff. I get it. When you're on site, things happen. It's a production-orientated environment, and that's okay.
Yep.
Right? That's okay. That's what these organizations are there to do. Productivity is important, and it's not a bad thing to talk about it. So I get when things happen, they have a limited time frame to apply a solution, whatever it might be, right? So it could be an injury situation, it could be a plant breakdown, whatever it is, whichever adversely impacts their ability to produce, right? They need to, for the most part, put a solution in place, whatever it is, in place quickly, so they can get back onto their schedule and production targets, and that's okay. So that then, for me, stifles the curiosity aspect. It stifles wait a minute, we've tried various things to solve this problem, and some of it's working, we think, but then there's stuff that's just not working. Why is that? Right, so then we get into hot principles and learning teams, and something that I'm a fan of is listening teams, and it's been around for a long time. None of this stuff is new, but I think organizations don't give themselves permission to really be curious and sit with the problem and go, you know what? We don't actually know what to do.
I actually want to dive a little bit more into listening tours, learning teams. Where do they come into play in this? How can we really utilize them?
Well, I think the reason why people are starting to resonate a lot more with those principles, and as you say, they're not new, they've been around a long time, but I think people are starting to recognise the complexity of what they're trying to manage and what they're trying to deal with, and I think people are starting to open up to that. So all of them, for me, are underpinned by learning, which comes from curiosity, which then means I don't know what the problem is. I don't know what the key problem is. There's lots of different potential problems here. And there's not one solution that fixes everything. And I think quite a few people are starting to come to terms with that reality, which means there's certain elements within our safety approach that are complicated and can be managed with very technical aspects to our work. But they're all surrounded by complexity, which means we've got to be curious around how people are seeing things, how people are experiencing things, the sense-making that goes in behind some of these technical aspects of work. So, for example, HOP, at least it recognises that humans make mistakes.
People make mistakes.
And blame and learning can counteract each other. So if we go down the blame, then we're going to stifle a bit of learning. So learning about something is what's provoking a lot of this curiosity around how things are happening, how we respond matters. And I think that then feeds into what's really taken hold is around these learning teams. Instead of typical, this is my opinion here, but typical investigation processes tend to fall into that complicated process. Like there's a technical approach and provide a technical solution to things. As you say, an action. I need to do something. What learning teams is starting to get organisations to do is to recognise there's a bit of test and try that needs to happen here. Like we need to test a few things, and it may work sometimes and it may not work every time. And that's okay. What we need to do is keep learning from that testing and that trying to see how people will start to evolve within the context of the system. And I think that's why they're starting to get a little bit more understanding from people.
So I've been aware of adaptive leadership and adaptive challenges for a long time now. It's a very humbling space to be in, to say, you know what, I don't know. I don't know what to do. But it's also a very powerful place for a leader to stand and put their hand on their heart and go, I don't really know what to do here. Todd Conklin, who's well known in this HOP space, he published a book a number of years ago, I can't even remember when it was, called Pre-Accident Investigations, which is basically looking at situations and doing an investigation before the accident happens. And I can remember seeing the cover of this book on LinkedIn or somewhere. I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So I bought the book and I had to read through it. And that's where he talks about learning teams and all these things, and talks about complexity and all of that stuff. So learning teams, for me, are a way to try and get to the adaptive aspect. And I think for most challenges, there is a technical and adaptive piece to it. It's not just purely adaptive. There is a technical aspect. But what is the adaptive piece that we're not seeing? We're not taking the time to discover. We're not being vulnerable enough to say, well, there is something here that I don't know. So yeah, we'll do this because we know that works. But what else is missing that we really don't understand today? And how can we get a better understanding? So you invite people from the front line. You do these learning teams. Or as a senior leadership team, you say, okay, what are we really interested in? What's our data telling us? What are we really interested in now? And what are we going to spend over the next few days? Holly, John, Julissa, Alan, these are 3 questions. I want you to go out and ask these 3 questions of as many people as possible. Ask the question, shut up and listen. Don't provide any solutions. And then we'll convene, we'll sit down, and then we'll share what we heard and try and get to the source of the complexity, which we can then try and identify a more reasonable solution that we can try. And it might not work. But again, we'll learn from what worked, what didn't work. And that just takes time. You know, getting back to people don't have time. Incident happens, there's pressure. Yeah, we'll do the ICAM. The ICAM will be done within 6 days. So there's all this flurry of activity, and a health and safety advisor spends 3 or 4 days doing this ICAM when they're not out on site doing what they should be doing. They're in the office. Oh, it's just, we just see it time and time again in organizations.
You've mentioned a few things there, Alan, that really say to me embracing the curiosity mindset is what is key here. Yep. And even just in that response then, you had a few tips. What other tips can we give people to help embrace curiosity?
Start with the fact that just recognise what you know about something is very much contained by your experience and your perspective of things. So we talk about that as your bias. And so curiosity comes by just acknowledging the limitation of what you know and wanting to know what other people think and what other processes are out there and what else can come with that. I've started to deliberately use that with leaders now before they go out in the field, is asking them, so based on what you know, what is it you're actually curious about? Before you go out, what are you curious about? And they get stumped around that. They say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, let me just use an example. If you've had a recent incident and you've come up with some actions and you've changed some work processes, and they'll go, yes, this, for example, the other day, these leaders had put a different process in place for traffic management, and so a very technical solution to people working and machinery around. I said, well, based on that, so what are you actually now curious about? Well, I'm actually curious to see if that's working and what people think about it. Right, well, if you're curious about whether it's working and what people think about it, what questions do you need to go ask? As you say, 1, 2, 3 questions to go out and ask and listen and just listen to what people have to say about it and see if it's starting to help you understand that. So summarising that is recognise the limitation of what you know and start thinking about what is it I want to know more about and frame some questions to help get that information.
And it's hard, right, for people, especially in more senior management positions. There's still this feeling that they should have the solution, they should have the answers, right? Getting back to the Heifetz and Linsky model of adaptive leadership, one of the things, and it's been paraphrased over the years, is the people with the problem are the problem, but they're also the solution. The people with the problem are the problem, but they're also the solution. And that's the whole learning teams concept. Go and talk to the people doing the job, find out what's hard, find out what's difficult, find out what barriers are in place, what we're asking them to do versus can they do what we're asking them to do, and what barriers might be in place that prevents them from doing that. And that's where the complacency and the shortcuts and all that kind of language begins to creep in. Oh, they become complacent. Oh, they must have been taking a shortcut. Oh, they should know what to do. Oh, they shouldn't have done that. I'll say, you're right. They shouldn't have. But why did they do it?
Yeah. Well, the recent conversation in that space, because I think that's really interesting, is to go, the people who are a part of the problem are also a part of the solution. And I had a recent leader, when they started to recognise that that's actually real, like that, there's some truth in that, and that they went, well, why wouldn't people then just put the solution in place? Like if these people know the solution, why aren't they doing that? And so, well, because sometimes we haven't given them the permission to do that, or they don't feel like they have the permission to do that. So that's your job as a leader, is to go out and have the right conversation so people have the permission now to go, well, could we try this and could we try that? And I think that's the bit great leaders start to recognise, is that not everyone's going to feel like they can contribute to a solution without being asked. And I think that's the curiosity bit too that comes in, is just being curious around what people's ideas are, because they're not always going to be workable. But having that space and creating that space for people to actually share what they think would help solve some of these problems.
Yeah, and I think another thing, I don't know if solution's the right word, but again, it's associated with curiosity, and something that we're being asked to do more of on a regular basis is developing frontline leaders' coaching skills, right? And even the understanding of what does that look like can get a little bit collapsed. So we spend a lot of time just being in the field with a supervisor, a superintendent, or a manager, and just how they're interacting with people, and how curious, inviting them to be more curious. So sometimes when we are doing the preparation, so what are you interested in? So John, we're going out in the field today, we're going to watch Holly and Jalissa doing whatever it is they're doing. What are you interested in discovering when you're out there? Oh, well, I've got this CCV to do, I've got to do a visible safety leadership conversation. I said, yeah, cool. But what are you interested in? What are you interested in discovering when you're out there? So let's think about that. So I was even on site last week or the week before, working with someone, and this superintendent who's so keen, he said, I just want to be the best superintendent I can be. So I'm coaching this person who's doing the coaching. So we did a interaction in the field, and then he came back and he said, I struggle, and this is a very intelligent individual. He said, I struggle finding the right question. And he said, can you give me some starter questions, which we can do, right? And there's a lot out there. So I had a conversation with the person I was with, and we crafted some questions. And where would you start? So what's the first question you would ask? So it's a great question. And he said, before I enter into the area, I just step back, and he says, tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. And that's the whole situational awareness thing. So tell me what you see, that ties to situational awareness. Do you see what I see, sort of thing? Well, I see this, what do you see? And then it begins to reveal that we don't always see the same thing at the same time. And then there was questions to use, but they're all discovery questions that if he wants to get a little bit deeper. So it's all about unearthing what's going on and any potential barriers that might be in place for the people to do the job that you're asking them to do. So I think coaching is always, for me, about being curious, and then asking questions is a skill. Asking the right question is a skill, and listening is a skill. So all of these things people don't necessarily identify as a key skill, and all that stuff goes back into learning teams. It goes back into listening tours. So that at a fundamental level, it's asking a really powerful question, which isn't a long, complicated question. It's just a really powerful question, which gets the person to think, and then just being curious after that, just listening. Well, what about? Tell me more about that. Right. So for me, it all starts there, and then the other stuff can flow out from there.
Mentioning the coaching there is actually a really great point, because I wanted to ask about our Fatality Free Future program here and how do we approach complexity through that? And one of the ways is coaching, but what are some of the other ways we do that?
Look, I think first of all, it's setting up a very deliberate approach to engage everyone in the organisation. I think some approaches generally target just leaders and put all the emphasis on leaders going out and understanding the problem and having the solutions. So what we bring to an organisation is a very structured approach to engaging the whole organisation to bring people in, not just in a learning team environment, but in the whole approach to fatality prevention. And from that, having the right, giving the leaders and even the team themselves the coaching skills required to actually start being more curious about the work and looking at these critical risks, these fatality potential events on a routine basis, not just when events happen and not just from a tick the box verification process, actually stopping and having conversations about the work where these fatality risks are and really be curious about how they're working and what's happening, because they all sit in the complex element. So we can't just keep saying we're addressing these fatality risks just by checking boxes. We actually need to have meaningful conversations about them.
I think the structure is important. And we were having a conversation, it was another forum a few weeks ago, about it's not just developing the coaching skills in supervisors, superintendents and managers, it's developing a coaching culture in an organisation so that people are willing, when they're invited to respond to a question, they know what's happening. They know what it is, why we're asking that question. And it's because we care about them, we value them, we respect them. So people are open to being coached, right? So it's not just developing the coaching skills in people, it's about developing coaching skills in everybody, so that when they're asked a question, they're not suspicious about why you're asking the question and all the rest of it. It's all about learning. It's all about being better. It's all about improving. It's all about removing barriers. It's all about making it easy for people to do what it is you're asking them to do. And that's the role of a leader. And once we get there, I think we'll be in a pretty good place.
Yeah, and I think just on that final note, those who have embraced and practiced and continue to practice their coaching skills, you start to notice how more open they are when they're being coached. Like instantly they understand the connection between exploration and learning, not just for them as a role, but for them as a person.
Alan, thank you for joining us in the studio today to embrace the complexity.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatality Free Future podcast. Head to our Fatality Free Future hub on barclays.com for more information and to access everything we spoke about in this episode.